They never used the word failure, but you didn't need it spelled out. In one calm interview, everything about the Cleveland Browns' future shifted. The tone wasn't angry, it wasn't defensive, it was deliberate. And buried inside those carefully chosen words was a message that hit harder than any press release ever could. This next coaching hire isn't about schemes, resumes, or splashy names. It's about one player. And if you're not aligned with that reality, you're already out of the running. For years, Cleveland has lived in reaction mode. One mistake leads to another. One rushed decision creates two more problems. But this time feels different. There's no panic in the voice, no scrambling for cover. Instead, there's clarity, almost stubborn clarity, the kind that suggests lessons were learned the hard way, behind closed doors, after watching something nearly slip away. Because what's happening now isn't just damage control, it's an attempt to stop history from repeating itself before it's too late. At the center of all of it is a young quarterback who's no longer being treated like an experiment or a question mark. He's being treated like a line in the sand. And the most surprising part isn't that the Browns are committing to him, it's how publicly, how unapologetically, and how strategically they're doing it. Because when a general manager makes this kind of stance in the middle of a coaching search, it's not just a vote of confidence, it's a warning. And what happened next made it clear this wasn't up for debate. Andrew Berry didn't raise his voice, he didn't posture, he didn't dramatize the moment. That's what made it land harder. In an interview that could have easily been brushed off as standard front office talk, Berry chose his words with surgical precision, and one word in particular quietly reframed the entire coaching search. Not rebuild, not patience, not even accountability. It was the implication that anything less than full commitment to the quarterback's development wouldn't just be a disagreement, it would be unacceptable. When Berry spoke about leadership and development, there was no ambiguity. He made it clear that neglect, hesitation, or internal resistance toward the quarterback wasn't something that could be coached up or smoothed over. It was disqualifying. That's a rare stance coming from a general manager, especially in a league where vague language is often used to keep options open. Berry wasn't leaving options open, he was closing doors before candidates even knew they were standing in front of one. What caught people off guard wasn't just the firmness of the message, it was who it came from. Andrew Berry isn't known for emotion-driven statements. He's methodical, calculated, almost reserved to a fault. So when someone like that draws such a clear line publicly, it signals that internal conversations have already gone further than anyone outside the building realized. This wasn't theory, this was policy. Berry framed the next head coach as a partner, not a dictator. Someone aligned not just with the front office, but with ownership as well. That detail mattered. It meant this wasn't just one executive's opinion, it was an organizational mandate. A united front with a single focal point: develop the quarterback, protect the process, eliminate mixed messaging. Because the Browns have seen what happens when everyone isn't pulling in the same direction. The subtext was impossible to miss. Any coach coming in with their own quarterback preferences, their own long-term what-if plans, or a wait-and-see attitude wasn't going to make it very far. This job comes with terms, and the terms are non-negotiable. Berry didn't say the word out loud, but the implication was there. Sabotage doesn't always look like open conflict. Sometimes it looks like hesitation. And Cleveland is done tolerating that. And that raised an uncomfortable question. If this standard is new, what exactly was missing before? To understand why that line mattered so much, you have to understand the damage that came before it. The Cleveland Browns don't just have a quarterback problem, they have quarterback trauma. Decades of it. Draft picks rushed into chaos, young arms thrown behind unstable systems, promises made in April, abandoned by October. It's a cycle so familiar in Cleveland that fans learned to recognize the ending before the story even really began. The list is long, and the pattern is always the same. Hope, pressure, confusion, collapse. Brady Quinn was supposed to be pro-ready, only to be dropped into a rotating door of coordinators. Johnny Manziel arrived with chaos already baked in an environment that had no structure to contain it. Baker Mayfield showed real promise, real fire, and real results, but even he couldn't escape the whiplash of constant change and conflicting voices. Different players, different personalities, same outcome. Development was always treated like something that should happen automatically, instead of something that had to be protected. What made it worse was the inconsistency. One bad stretch and patience evaporated. One coaching change and the entire vision shifted. Quarterbacks were asked to adapt on the fly, while the system around them never stayed still long enough to be mastered. When things went wrong, the finger-pointing started. Sometimes it landed on the player, sometimes on the coach, rarely on the process itself. And that's how talent gets burned before it ever has a real chance to grow. That history looms over everything the Browns do now. It's the ghost in every evaluation, the cautionary tale behind every draft decision. Barry knows this isn't just about finding the right quarterback, it's about finally ending the environment that keeps ruining them. And that's why this moment feels different. Because for the first time, Cleveland isn't pretending the past didn't happen. They're treating it like a warning they refuse to ignore. And that's exactly why one single game suddenly meant more than anyone expected. It didn't look like a season-defining moment at first. No fireworks, no viral highlights looping on every channel, just a late-game drive in a tense stadium, with the Browns trailing and the margin for error gone. But inside the building, that sequence against the Bengals changed how people looked at everything, especially the quarterback. With the noise rising and the pressure tightening, this was the kind of situation that had swallowed Browns signal callers in the past. And this time, it didn't. Down late, with the pocket collapsing and the defense daring him to make a mistake, Shedeur Sanders didn't panic. He didn't force throws. He didn't chase a hero moment that wasn't there. Instead, he slowed the game down, took what the defense gave him, managed the clock, managed himself. Each decision felt intentional, like someone who understood the moment instead of being overwhelmed by it. The drive wasn't flashy, and that's exactly why it mattered. It showed control. It showed discipline. More importantly, it showed emotional balance. The Browns didn't win because the quarterback did something reckless or miraculous. They won because he stayed steady when the situation begged him not to. For a franchise that's watched promising quarterbacks unravel in similar moments, that composure stood out in a way the stat sheet never could. Inside the organization, that drive became a reference point. Not publicly at first, not loudly, but it kept coming up in evaluations, in conversations about leadership, in discussions about what kind of support this quarterback actually needs. Because in that moment, it became clear that the problem wasn't whether he could handle chaos, it was whether the organization could finally stop creating it around him. And that realization exposed a deeper tension that had been building all season long. That tension didn't explode in headlines or sideline blow-ups. It stayed quiet, almost too quiet. But over the course of the season, there were moments that didn't quite line up, and people around the league noticed. Reports and insider chatter began to suggest there was a disconnect, not personal but philosophical, between the quarterback's development and how the offense was being managed. Nothing ever confirmed outright, no dramatic leaks, just patterns that were hard to ignore. Play calling felt cautious in moments where aggression made sense, then strangely rigid when flexibility was needed. Certain concepts that matched the quarterback's strengths appeared inconsistently. Rotation decisions raised eyebrows, and in press conferences, when questions turned toward long-term development, the answers rarely carried conviction. They sounded safe, non-committal, as if the plan was being evaluated week by week instead of built deliberately over time. The most telling signs came in what wasn't said. When the quarterback stepped up late in games, praise focused on execution, not growth. When mistakes happened, they were framed clinically, stripped of context. That approach isn't inherently wrong, but for a young quarterback, it can feel isolating. Development thrives on trust and direction, and the messaging never fully conveyed that both sides were moving toward the same end goal. Over time, that subtle distance mattered. It created an environment where the quarterback was asked to prove himself continuously without ever fully being empowered, where flashes were acknowledged but commitment remained conditional. And for an organization trying to turn the page on its past, conditional belief was never going to be enough. That's when the front office made a choice, not loudly, not impulsively, but decisively. Because what came next wasn't just about replacing a coach, it was about redefining what the job even meant. This time, the job doesn't come with creative freedom, it comes with a mandate. That's what separates this coaching search from every other one Cleveland has run in the past. The organization isn't asking who's the best coach available, they're asking who fits this vision without hesitation. And the vision is already set. The quarterback isn't a question to be answered later, he's the foundation everything else is being built on. Behind closed doors, this search is operating with filters most teams won't admit to publicly. Candidates aren't just being evaluated on their record or playbook, they're being evaluated on their willingness to adapt, teach, and commit. There's no room for ego-driven systems or long trial periods to see what happens. The Browns want a coach who shows up with a plan for the quarterback on day one, not an outline that gets adjusted if things go sideways. That patience is intentional. The front office isn't rushing the timeline because they understand the cost of getting it wrong again. Speed feels good in headlines, but alignment lasts longer. By slowing the process down, Cleveland is signaling that short-term optics don't matter nearly as much as long-term cohesion. They're prepared to wait weeks if that's what it takes, because the alternative is another misaligned hire that sets everything back. What makes this approach unusual is how clearly defined the power structure is. This isn't a coach-first organization anymore. It's an aligned one. Ownership, front office, and the next head coach are expected to operate in lockstep, with no daylight between philosophies. The coach won't be walking into Cleveland to choose his quarterback, he'll be walking in to develop one. And that expectation changes everything about the role. But for the quarterback at the center of this plan, that level of commitment isn't just protection, it's a spotlight. Being the centerpiece doesn't come with comfort, it comes with pressure that never really turns off. Sanders isn't being shielded from scrutiny by this commitment, he's being placed directly under it. Every throw, every decision, every mistake is magnified when the organization makes it clear that you're the plan. There's no hiding behind competition narratives or temporary labels anymore. This is what belief actually looks like in the NFL, and it's heavier than people realize. His rookie season hasn't been clean. There have been misreads, late throws, hits he probably didn't need to take, moments where the speed of the game showed up all at once. Anyone pretending otherwise isn't paying attention. But the evaluation inside the building isn't focused on mistakes in isolation. It's focused on response. How quickly does he settle back in? Does he rush the next play or reset? Does frustration leak into decision-making, or does he stay composed? Those answers matter more than box scores ever will. What keeps coming up in conversations around the team is temperament. Sanders doesn't spiral, he doesn't point fingers. After rough stretches, he doesn't disappear. In interviews, he owns mistakes without dramatizing them and talks about preparation instead of excuses. Film study, timing, chemistry. It's repetitive in the best way, the kind of repetition that signals routine, not panic. That steadiness is part of why the front office is comfortable placing this much weight on his development. But commitment cuts both ways. When the organization wraps itself around a quarterback like this, expectations rise quietly. Growth isn't optional anymore. Patience exists, but it's paired with accountability. Sanders knows that. He said it without being asked. He's not looking to be saved by a system or carried by staff. He wants structure,
clarity, and the freedom to fail without being buried for it. That balance is rare, and it's exactly what the Browns are trying to build. The gamble isn't whether Sanders has flaws. Every young quarterback does. The gamble is whether Cleveland can finally create an environment that allows those flaws to be worked through instead of weaponized. Because belief alone doesn't develop quarterbacks, process does. And now the entire organization is about to be tested on whether it can live up to the standard it just set. What's happening now goes far beyond one position or one hire. This is a cultural reset, and the quarterback just happens to be the clearest indicator of it. For years, Cleveland chased quick fixes, new schemes, new voices, new identities every time things stalled. Now, instead of tearing everything down again, the organization is choosing something far more difficult: consistency. Real consistency. The kind that forces patience even when noise gets loud. When a franchise commits this firmly to a quarterback, it simplifies everything else. Draft decisions stop being about abstract value and start being about fit. Free agency becomes targeted instead of reactionary. Weekly game plans are built to support strengths instead of exposing weaknesses. Most importantly, accountability shifts upward. If progress stalls, the first question isn't whether the
Quarterback belongs. It's whether the environment is doing its job. That alone represents a massive philosophical change for a team that has historically moved on far too quickly. This approach mirrors what successful franchises quietly do when they get it right. They don't churn leadership every time adversity hits. They protect development through ugly stretches and let growth compound. Cleveland hasn't always shown that restraint, and that's why this moment feels so different. The organization isn't pretending the past didn't happen. It's responding to it directly, with structure instead of optimism. There's risk in this, and everyone involved knows it. Tying your identity to a young quarterback means living with uncomfortable weeks, public doubt, and inevitable mistakes, but it also creates something the Browns have rarely had: a shared direction. No more split messaging, no more hedging, no more subtle distancing when things go wrong. Everyone is tied to the same outcome, for better or worse. This isn't the loudest reset Cleveland has ever attempted. There are no grand declarations or manufactured hype, but foundational shifts rarely look dramatic in the moment. They reveal themselves over time in how decisions are made when pressure returns, and pressure will return. That's the final test, because this reset only works if the organization holds the line when it gets uncomfortable, and that's exactly what happens next. So now the Browns are standing in a familiar crossroads, but with an unfamiliar approach. Instead of searching for hope in the next big name or the next shortcut to relevance, they've anchored themselves to a single idea and refuse to budge. This isn't a guarantee of success. Nothing in the NFL ever is, but it is a declaration of intent. Cleveland isn't promising instant results. They're promising alignment, and that alone separates this moment from so many that came before it. For Sanders, this is both an opportunity and a responsibility. He's no longer just trying to survive week to week or prove he belongs. He's being asked to grow with the weight of an entire organizational vision on his shoulders. That kind of trust can either accelerate development or expose every crack, and how he responds will say just as much as how the Browns support him when things inevitably go sideways. For the franchise, this decision forces accountability at every level. If the plan works, Cleveland finally breaks a cycle that's defined decades of instability. If it fails, there's nowhere to hide behind excuses, system changes, or rushed pivots. The quarterback has been chosen, the path has been outlined, the rest will be judged by execution, not intention. And that's the real question hanging over all of this. Not whether Sanders is talented enough, not whether the next coach has the right resume, but whether the Browns, as an organization, can finally stay disciplined when patience is tested and doubt creeps back in.
because the difference between another restart and something real doesn't come down to belief, it comes down to whether Cleveland follows through when belief stops being easy.